welcome again to the high place. So I ended up not going back to New York yesterday, Friday. Stayed another couple weeks at least to look after my mother. She needs, we had to reschedule some tests and some follow-ups with her doctors and whatnot, so my new return date is the 12th. So, blessed that I'm able to come back up here. Come out and pray and talk. Opportunities, these rare opportunities, and even though over the last several weeks it seems like, I've been out here a lot and talked a lot, I'm very conscious of the finite nature of the opportunity. So grateful for the opportunity to come back out today, pray. It's like my church. And I might even be able to come out, one more time, which would be good. And maybe by then I won't have anything else to say. As you guys know me, it's like, it's probably not the case. Always got something to say. So I took it easy on the Florida water today, because the last time, if you saw my last video, I got a swarm that came up here, a swarm of bees, and there are a few now. So it's definitely that agua de Florida. So it was very, I used it very sparingly on the altar, Abhishekam with the Bhaktanai Anjaneyya, when you bathe the deity, the avatar of the deity, like in pujas in Hindu temples and around the world. Abhishekam is like you're bathing the deity with all these offerings, these sacred offerings, sweet milk and honey and saffron and different things. And I used the agua de Florida and the 4 primary sacraments of the Lakota: sage, sweetgrass, tobacco, and cedar. And I wasn't able to get out and get some cedar, buy some cedar, a cedar bundle, so I collect some cedar out here, because there's a lot, sage, there's a lot of that out here in the desert. But I'm very respectful, and I always put down tobacco when I take cedar. I always remember that, offer, give, before you take. So I do that. There's a few bees. I put out some water for them, so hopefully they'll, there's one drinking there. They'll take advantage of that. I'm just assuming it's the agua Florida that really brings them in. I wouldn't think, and synthetic would do that, but I guess there's enough natural in there to draw them. Way out and up the wash, there's like 3 primary, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 washes that I come up across and come up to get up here. Like I told you last time, it's probably about 3.5, 4 miles to the car, to the road. There's just a little parking, like pull off probably see people out here. I've probably seen the most people I've ever seen out here on this particular trip. Not today, but I mean in terms of being out here the last couple months. And most people go into the bowl and take a spin around the bowl because it's, it's magnificent. I've shown it. And then they head out. Day hikers for the most part. I have never seen sign of someone coming up here. I see my signs, the things that I mark, but never seen signs of someone else coming up here and disturbing the altar, disturbing the beacon that I have down at the bottom. It's interesting. Again, talking about like the magnificence of this place hiding in plain sight. And even though people might come in and go to like the main part of the main attraction of the bowl, like there's places like this that are nearby but go mostly unmolested, which is I really appreciate that. So another couple of miles past like where the park on the road is, the north part of Lake Mead, and the feeder river of Lake Mead is the Colorado, and of course further south it turns into Lake Mead, and then it's all backed up by that great bathtub plug of the Hoover Dam. So I think there's been water available within like a day's hike from a lot of these areas for probably thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So up in the Valley of Fire, there's petroglyphs, and the archaeologists attempt to translate those, but no one really knows what they mean. From the ancient Pueblo people, sometimes they're called Anasazi. But if you're, if you see things differently, like via your experience with the medicine or intuitive sense, you see those things, and then you can kind of pick out like elements that seem like a story of ancient, medicine people, ancient, shamans, ancient priests, if you will, that would go up into the high formations, like in the Valley of Fire, and pray, to the cosmos, and then would represent certain elements from the cosmos, in their rock art, in their petroglyphs. So, and they say those are 40,000 years old there. So the access to water, a lot of water. Maybe obviously there's basins that get filled up when it rains, but they tanks that evaporate. But access to like the Colorado is just a day, hike from here, if that. I mean, I could hike it there, half a day, 4 hours, 5 hours probably from here. So, interesting place. That's why I feel like, I'm not the first one to come here and pray. It won't be the last one. There's something about this place. A lot of bees. So, trying to keep this shorter than the last one. Talking to a friend yesterday, and kind of stuck with me coming up today, so I guess I'll go ahead and talk about a little bit spiritual bypassing. Guilty. Guilty is charged. But my understanding of spiritual bypassing, my experience with it, is, people, ardent believers and ardent followers of different paths, religious, orthodoxy, fundamentalism, organized religion, even the more esoteric stuff that I've gotten into over the years, like devotional Hinduism, bhakti, and Buddhism, and the mystical paths of Islam, with Sufism, and Gnosticism, mystical like Christianity, and Taoism, and the medicine path, and the cosmology, around the Amazonian peoples, Amazonian region peoples, and the Red Road, the Dakota peoples, so ardent followers of those paths, or different aspects of those paths, or any path, can sometimes feel a certain level of righteousness or superiority in a way over other people that don't follow those paths, have those perspectives. And they use that position of authority, or position of perspective, warped perspective, if you will, to suppress or deny other perspectives. And I've done it, I've definitely done it, different over the years, the last 20, 30 years, felt that because, I had, attained something, a certain understanding, or, did certain, rituals, or, dieta, or whatever, that I had a little bit of knowledge that I could leverage and put me on a different plane than other people that hadn't, and then use that that orientation, that position as a bludgeon against other people in their ways. And interesting, in the last year with the COVID phenomena, I had to pull away from my communities and my social circumstances and my groups, like that that I'm going to broadly label as spiritual communities or medicine communities. And one of the main reasons I did this because I felt like the spiritual bypassing, the level of spiritual bypassing was much more rampant than I had originally thought, or what I had experienced prior to COVID. And that disturbed me, and that I had to step away and look at myself, and check myself, because obviously there's a judgment there as well. And one of the things that I tried to do, and I was taught, if you want to call it that, I was taught, was to make sure that I checked that kind of stuff, the spiritual stuff, the medicine stuff, and checked it against, things like, transpersonal psychotherapy with a really good practitioner, and then checked it also against more, body, mind practice or orientation, I'll call it, sadhana, inclusive for me, like yoga asana, chanting and puja, and time alone in nature, things like that. So it's kind of like 3 legs of a stool. I've described this before. One leg is the spiritual paths. For me, it's primarily devotional Hinduism and Buddhism, and the medicine paths, and animism and shamanism. And then another leg of the stool was my own personal sadhana, which includes those things, but really the way that I personally assimilate and synthesize those things, and the tools that I use to do that, physical practice, emotional practice, those kinds of things. Contemplative practice, excuse me. And then the third leg was the transpersonal psychotherapy, primarily through people like Abdi Asadi and Richard Buckrock, my late teacher Richard Buckrock. And I miss Richard. He passed away not too long after Lefty passed away. Lefty passed away on the winter solstice, December the 21st, 2017. The return of the light, the return of the king, very auspicious time for him to transition. That's not lost on me. And then Richard passed away, a few months later, February the 14th, Valentine's Day, 2018. Devastating. Two really devastating losses close together. And anyway, I had worked with Richard. I was a client of Richard for, I want to say, over 10 years, and both in couples therapy with Dana, and then also as an individual. And it was really important to have his wise, compassionate, gentle perspective, skilled perspective, to ground me in the other things, the crazy world of the medicine space and the communities around those things, and my own neuroses and those kinds of things. So yeah, the spiritual bypassing of the last year or so seems to be really powerful. And the reason why I say that is because I've talked about it before. Like, we live in really, really dangerous times right now, and it's obvious to me and many others like me that share this perspective, that we're in like World War III, an information war, but also a spiritual war, propaganda war and a spiritual war. And the forces that we're up against are really powerful, and leverage some pretty sophisticated weapons in terms of social engineering and those kinds of things. And all the institutions that we had believed in the past, individuals and institutions have utterly failed us because they're so corrupt. It's interesting, that we put our faith in people. We put our faith in individuals. We put our faith in institutions. And it's a lesson. It's a spiritual lesson to be disappointed in those people. And we're seeing, a significant degree of disappointment across the board right now, in all our institutions, our corrupted institutions. And so you could see like the examples of like one individual being completely projected upon, and despised and loathed and hated, by a group of people, and that same group of people use the same kind of orientation towards institutions or individuals, in terms of supporting them. So project onto one, and then deny or turn a blind eye to the other, whether it's a group or institutions or individuals or whatever. So it's interesting to watch these dynamics, and the word hypocrisy is a little bit too insufficient. It's because it's so well engineered by the powers that be. Abdi talks about, and I've talked about it, and many others have talked about it, the divide and conquer. I mean, if I'm an individual and I project onto one person all this rage and loathing and you know, just vitriol. I'm being defined in terms of the divide and conquer by anyone that supports that person or supports any aspects of what that person represents, as being the enemy or the other, so there's that. And then on the other hand, from the other perspective, if you have a group of people or a person or an institution or whatever that you believe in, and vehemently defend those institutions or people and ideas for that matter, that is problematic. And it's just like another side of that coin, in the context of the spiritual bypassing. That's what I'm talking about. To be the target of such vitriol and hate and projection on the one hand, but not the people targeting you, they're not having the skills necessary or the wherewithal necessary to kind of look at themselves and see that projection happening, and not see the fact that they're denying an aspect of themselves by tacitly supporting these other things, even in the midst of information that like story. I'm making it more complicated than it needs to be, just because I don't have a really good command of words around that aren't like really inflammatory, and I'm really trying hard to kind of stay out of the inflammatory stuff, because I'm in the high place, and so I try to bring those things back to myself and say I certainly judged people, and I still do. I try and catch myself in that judgment, in that projection of, why are you like the way you are, and, why don't you see the hypocrisy that you are exemplifying? Anyway, divide and conquer. It's a clever means of divide and conquer, to constantly stoke people's triggers, whether it's around COVID, vaccine mandates, RT-PCR tests and their accuracy, immunity passports or vaccine passports, lockdowns, bombings of foreign countries, on and on and on. If these situations that we're up against, censorship, cancel culture, ID politics, identity politics, all these, stances and positions that really seem like they've been artificially created and propagated and promoted. If it's really interesting. I consider myself a social justice warrior, like many of you. But I'm also very, very careful about not espousing the corporate version of that. Not espousing something that has been co-opted and twisted and to serve a particular agenda. And we're seeing a lot of that. And so it's really, for me, I had to really step back and really center and use practices like this of coming to the high place to really kind of discern. For me, it's really an energetic discernment. so yeah, the spiritual bypassing in the medicine communities that I belong seems to be rampant. And I know that's a hard thing for many people to hear, you know. And, I'm here to talk about hard things because those things aren't talked about in those communities or in the groups that I was, you know, belonging to, talking about very specific things, you know, with regard to, you know, bypassing judgment and projection. They're very difficult, and you can't, you know, to come at those things from like a hive mind or a group perspective is really problematic. It's very similar to like what happens in the variación. You know, you've got a lot of information, more information than you ever, you know, in the waking consensus reality world. You know, a lot more information coming at you, and so, you know, boundaries are a big part of working in that space. And it seems like, you know, out of that space, but even still immersed in those communities, the boundaries are softened and much more permeable, like particularly post-ceremony. And so people are much more open, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to share and talk about things. But certain things don't get talked about because they're very triggering for some people. And so my own personal experience is like I could only like really delve into those really tricky things with individuals, you know, that could appropriately hold that space to allow that kind of dialogue to run its course in a cathartic, healing fashion. You know, people like Abdi Asadi and Richard Bachrock exemplified that ability, and so I aspire to that. I don't think I'll ever be able to match their level of skill, and but I'm really appreciative for them in my life. You know, my late teacher Richard, but Abdi's been very, very helpful to me. And through the grapevine, he is warned that the censorship's going to get worse, and I have experienced that dramatically over the last couple of weeks. You know, getting kicked off LinkedIn and then fighting for reinstatement, and was reinstated because I was able to like articulately make my case using facts and not flying off the handle, and backed up everything that I said that got me deplatformed, and I was reinstated because I consider myself fairly adept at arguing when it comes to using data and factual information and those kinds of things. But then I was recently censored like on Facebook because I was in a dialogue with people that had an opposing view and opinion, and someone must have flagged me as a bully, and so I got censored for that. Not thrown off the platform yet, I don't think. And the person or people that were doing that, I think, were professionals. Their dialogue seemed to leverage a lot of the similar talking points that I've seen elsewhere. So, from Big Pharma. So, you can be now talking to people and be censored because the whole thing around cancel culture and bullying and harassment has been weaponized. They can just invoke that simple thing, saying you're being a bully when you're just expressing like your point of view, and not being a bully and not being harassing, and get you censored. So this again the whole social justice thing has become very warped, and the cancel culture and IDPol stuff has become weaponized, and it's being leveraged to create more censorship, create more divisiveness, and it's really sad. And it seems to be, to me, that a lot of those themes are being parroted in the medicine communities and the spiritual communities. Just because it's being disseminated in a very systematic, pervasive, and clever way to appeal to people like myself that have a sense of social justice or want to see social justice carried forth through policy. And so those kinds of people are taken advantage of because they can be triggered with certain thematics, and those thematics can be used time and time again. They can be weaponized. So be careful. Wow, I got a swarm again. I'm glad that I can bring them water. It's very, it's beautiful that I can offer. I can make offerings to them in that way. When I was coming out, I saw the guardians. I call them the guardians. There's a pair of huge blackbirds, crows, ravens. I don't know if they're the same, so forgive me. But they're very big, and they have a very deep, guttural way of talking. And I saw them in the distance. They were kind of like around Hanuman's mountain. Hanuman. And they were kind of flying south, and I was like, oh, it's nice to see them. Haven't seen them in here for a while. I know it's the same pair that I've seen over and over again for years. And then I was coming up the wash, and about 20 minutes later, they came over the top of the great altar of healing and freedom here and down towards me. And one of them just like, bah, like just talked to me, and, they circled a couple of times, and talked to me a couple more times, and then, flew off. And, again, those signs, aside from like the wonderful sign of the bees here, the sign of the guardians, paying their respects or allowing me to pay my respects, is really powerful, really powerful. I'm so grateful for those kinds of things. So grateful for this place. So grateful for my life. Okay. I think that's it. In this time, in this very dangerous time, I pray for clarity. And I come up here to pray for clarity. And I come up here to pray for strength and impeccability. To be able to hold the prayers. Hold deep prayer. Healing and freedom. Allow that prayer to come through me. Teach me to pray. Pray thyself in me. And then, by holding the essence of those prayers, being of service. Teach me to serve, perform service. And realize that, I'm not perfect. I've been unfriended many people over the last year, because I fell into that divide and conquer paradigm. And, got up on my high horse and felt self-righteous and, used spiritual bypass and different things. And I have to really be careful and, pray for clarity. Pray that I don't fall into that trap, those typical traps. And so coming out here and praying and talking to you helps me. Praise be to Hanuman, great servant of Ram, great servant of Sita, great servant of Lakshman, Jai Hanumanji, forever and ever and ever. Jai Hanumanji, Sita Road.